Hey, good morning, everyone. We made it through another week. Let me hide our picture there. There we are. I'm here today. It's Friday morning. I woke up and I thought it was Thursday for sure. So another one of those blurs days. But we are here. The end of the first week in June. We actually got some good news this morning with the government report that not as many people were unemployed. So that was a little bit of surprise, but I think we're still in for a little bit of a shock down the road. I think a lot of people are still employed because of the government PPP and some of the other bailouts. So it's still going to be a little rocky, but at least it was a little bit of a bright spot in there. And we're going to be talking about today, hopefully you'll be here for the entirety of this, but we're going to be talking about growth mindset, a way to move forward, and especially with some of the current events. Before we get there, just want to remind a couple people about things. If you're a member of Googleization Nation, hopefully you are. It's free. It's my community. And you'll get the advanced announcements about the webinars, and I'll talk about those in a second. But about podcasts, we got our weekly podcast, Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization, every week, doing multiple live streams, like we're doing today with Sarah. Next week, we're doing one on digital marketing, the importance of that. But we've had them on employment, cultures of trust, you name it. We probably covered it, but you can get advance notice, and very simply, you can go to GoogleizationNation.com, and it's free and join, and you'll get some emails. But part of that is, I don't have slides for those, but I do have some. Actually, I might have a slide for the one. But I'm not going to mess with going to trying to find that. Let me go to the banners. 2 weeks ago, or not even 2 weeks ago, a week ago, time flies, we had our first webinar of our 4-part series with Ed Gordon. Ed Gordon's a labor economist. He's the author of 20 books on the future of employment, or the future of jobs. That's one of his book titles, is Future Jobs. He's been predicting much of what's going on right now, skill shortages, what labor was going to look like, the impact of automation and technology and government and regulations, strong emphasis on reskilling and upskilling people and education. That certainly came to the forefront over the last few weeks. And again, a lot of the way people are going to get back to work is they're going to need new skills. I mean, almost everybody's going to need digital skills. We learned that real quickly about 3 months ago when everybody was sent home and people didn't necessarily have the digital skills to stay communicated or stay within, to be able to communicate back at work. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. So everybody needs better skills, different skills, and the transformation of that. So web, if anybody needs it, you can contact me. It is up on my LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook pages. So if you're watching this, you'll probably be able to see it. But the recording from last week's session is up there. And we have another one coming up at the end of the month, June 25th. It's at 2 p.m. And you can use this link on the bottom. Sorry, it's not active, but you can use that. But if you can go there and register, it's free, and that'll be the second one. And then we'll be having one on the 4th Thursday in July and the 4th Thursday in August. I am trying to get credits for these, SHRM credits. Can't promise that, but that's pending. And then this is brand new. And this will be the sort of the gift, the continuation of today's discussion. We're going to be focused. We're going to talk a lot today about what growth mindset is and the difference between that and fixed. Sort of an introductory session, and we'll go into a little background of how Sarah and I connected. But at the end of June, or mid-July, July 16th. At 2 p.m., we're going to be doing a seminar. It's going to be called Cultivating Diversity and Inclusion with Growth Mindset. Diversity and inclusion has obviously, when Sarah and I talked, this is a presentation she had given a month ago, maybe.
A month ago.
weeks ago, yeah. And that's where we met. I attended the session virtually online, and I thought it was a great presentation and an interesting approach to how to apply the growth mindset. I've been a big fan of that for years, and it seems to be I won't say a growing trend, but there's more and more people that are starting to recognize its value. But applying that to diversity and inclusion was just interesting. And then with the events of the tragic events of the last week, it sort of hit home, and it made a strong message. So we're going to introduce growth mindset today, and then in a few weeks we'll be talking about how to apply that toward building a more diverse and inclusive culture. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Sarah Turner from the Faurote Group, all the way from Indiana. We've brought the world a lot closer. So
there we go.
Yeah, and she and I shared, we were both doing presentations a few weeks ago for the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. The event went virtual for many other reasons. Turned out to be a fantastic event. We had an unbelievably good response. Very interesting. People adapted to virtual learning very quick and attending virtual seminars. But I attended that, and we hooked up after. As I said, I really enjoyed the presentation. I hooked up afterwards, and Sarah agreed to do this with me. So appreciate it. So Sarah, I'm going to kind of give everybody a brief intro of yourself, and I'm going to put your name up there so people know where it is and how to get in touch with you. But give a little bit of what you do for the Faurote Group, and then we'll lead into growth mindset.
Yeah, sounds great. And I think the first time that Ira, you and I talked, I instantly had this wonderful kinship with you because we both had non-traditional paths to getting to where we are today. I think that's such a clever thing to know that, and I say this all the time, but I find that what used to be the path, people would start their careers and stay in it, and it would be a 25, 35 plus year career commitment. That's not true today. And so what I used to think I was an anomaly, technically, I don't think I really am anymore.
There's a lot of out there.
I know, right? So I started my career in public accounting. So I usually tell people that I'm a recovering CPA, but I absolutely adore my roots. I find that if I didn't start where I did, I likely wouldn't end up where I am now. But I started my career in public accounting on the client service side. So I was a professional services, consultant. And for 5 years, I did that, but I had a strong underlying passion for helping the internal staff that we had at Deloitte. And I was super fortunate that I had a really great mentor while I was in my 5 years there who let me do some support with talent development. So we did some training, we did some onboarding, we did recruiting, and I learned the ways of how to get somebody positioned to get them to really unleash their contribution, which of course gives amazing gains to them as a person, but it also gives amazing gains to the clients that we had, but also to us as a company. And so in my 5 years there, that really established or affirmed that I loved working with people, and I loved working with the concept of what I now call the employee experience, right? How do we get that to be the most powerful it can be? And so that then led me to expanding my direction for a little bit. I ended up teaching at the college level. So I loved that. That was a really interesting spot in my career. And then that ended up reconnecting me with a former colleague at Deloitte who had just started his leadership consulting company called the Faurote Group. And that was 18 years ago. So you blink and 2 decades have nearly gone by. And so I get a chance to do such an amazing number of things, but specifically, again, in that concept of really creating experiences for people that are beyond where they maybe think they can be. So that aligns nicely with the growth mindset. It's putting people in a position to see the outcomes they don't even realize are there. And so we unleash talent, we unleash strengths, and we do it in a holistic way because we believe everything that you do should be able to carry forth to all the roles in your life. And I think that to me is just such a fun way to leverage what we do. So again, training, coaching, we do a lot of consulting too, but there's not a duplicate day in my life. Let's put it that way. And I love that. That's a neat thing.
Well, that's for sure. And again, we work in the same area, but my approach is more, I would say, maybe on the strategic side and kind of the leadership development, but from a different angle, because I don't do a lot of training and coaching with individuals. But we talk about the world of VUCA, VUCA, and I talked about this yesterday on my podcast. the world's certainly volatile, and that doesn't necessarily mean in a bad sense. It's obviously was very volatile in a lot of cities a week ago, a few days ago. But in a sense, it's always volatile because we just don't know what's going to happen. But it's definitely more uncertain, more complex, and more ambiguous. And that was the title of that was a theme of my TED Talk that I did a couple years ago. And we anticipated sort of living in this space, but then it's what do we do about it? I mean, if that's the context, if that's the world we live in, and we just tell people that you need to accept that things have changed. What are the tools that we can give them? And the growth mindset is just powerful. And I wrote about it a little bit in my book. You basically spend a lot more time specifically doing this. And then what I really enjoy doing it, I mean, I can talk about it as a concept, but as far as hands-on coaching and development and leading that and setting that strategy, that tends to be a lot more what you do. So, but before we dive in there, because that's what we're going to talk a lot about on our webinar, and especially in applying it to the current events of today. How do we apply it to is it a tool that we can use for in creating or cultivating a diverse and inclusive culture? It's not just diversity, hiring a bunch of people that have different colors, different genders, different sizes, different ages is okay. It's fairly easy to create a diverse culture, but having it as inclusive is the challenge. And that's where obviously a lot of people fail. But before we get there, let's talk about growth mindset. I mean, so it's not just that, hey, I want to grow. Give a little bit of background on it, and then obviously you always need a comparison. So growth mindset compares to what, and it's a fixed mindset.
That's
so
exactly right.
Let's talk about the basics.
Yeah, and so for many of us, I think the words mindset aren't necessarily new to us. I think most of us know that that's kind of a frame of mind. It's a perspective. It's the way we see something. And I think most of us have heard of a fixed mindset. I think we've used that term to apply to either ourselves or someone else. But I think when you really start to look at the general direction and the framing of it, that's when you start to learn and you start to see the amazing power of our brain. And I guess I'll say this, one of the things that intrigued me most about growth mindset as I started to take on an interest for learning more just in the last few years was really the idea that many of us think that our brains are established. And then once you get what you got, you deal with it. And that kind of perspective, it saddens me, but I think what's really cool and supportive is that over the last decade or more, there's been a lot more research around what really is happening in the brain. And that fascinates me because you can actually get great proof now that there are really great opportunities for us to remold the shape of our brain in certain centers. And the way that we see a moment to know that you can actually cultivate a growth mindset is really intriguing. And that's, of course, what we're going to talk about in the webinar is how do you do that? But the basics are really this. I mean, when you think about a growth mindset, it's really looking at an opportunity from the perspective of what we can do. I always kind of line it up with the idea of being opportunistic. It's the idea that you have the ability to influence something, to get something different. And it's not necessarily about the outcome. It's really more about the process. It's about the way that you approach the journey per se. Whereas a fixed mindset is very much more of that there are defined parameters and you kind of have a cap, you have a limit. There's really nothing else you can do. And so it allows you to kind of put yourself into a position where you almost have a ceiling in everything that you do because the way you approach things really puts that cap on you. And unfortunately, that creates a lot of a limitation as an individual, but also on what you can accomplish in anything that you do. And so I love helping people realize if you look at the fixed mindset where there's a defined end game, and if we didn't hit it or if we didn't get there, forget it, we're done. How different could it be if you really cultivated the idea that, no, it's not necessarily about the outcome. It's about what we gain on the way. Because as many of us know, we start out with an idea of what our goals will be. They change so regularly. The circumstances of our environment influence how we have to adapt and change. And so in today's environment, like you said, Ira, being agile and being flexible and adaptive might be one of the most powerful things you could possess that would be valuable to yourself and others. And this mindset, this concept of being able to see it as something that can change and is opportunistically in front of you is an amazing place to spend your time.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot you said there. So let me unpack. Let me go back and unpack it. One of the first things that you said, though, and I want to make sure that everybody's okay with this, is that you said almost everybody would understand fixed mindset. And I'm not sure they do. Again, in this context, and not that they're right, not that they're wrong, or not that we're right and they're wrong. But I think fixed mindset might be applied to people who are stubborn. That, they're just fixed in the way they see the world. And that's partly true. But what this model does, and again, a lot of it was, certainly promoted by Carol Dweck. So that way anybody wants to read a bit of this, I'm sure, I'm sure that's where you're familiar with as well. By the way, Carol Dweck is DWECK.
Yes.
DWECK, and the book's Mindset. So you can go up and you get it. It's a few dollars. I'd encourage everybody to get it.
For sure.
And her background was understanding why kids succeeded and why kids fail. Why did some super successful? Why did the valedictorian of the class fail in life, and the vocational kid became this multi-billionaire, multi-dollar billionaire, and that was really what the study was. So her focus was really on education and understanding that, and then it became, you could apply that. But I think when you take fixed mindset and say, yes, it may be right that fixed mindset is that person's stubborn, but the question is, why are they stubborn? Right?
Yeah. And what's interesting too is I think there are plenty of growth mindseted people that are stubborn, by the way, but stubborn for a completely different reason, right? Because I could say we need to really find a way to do something. And if I have people around me who are saying, no, it is the way it is, I might be stubborn and say, no, let's find a way. What I meant was, let's commit, let's be persistent, let's have grit. So I think you look at the word stubborn and you start to see this paradigm of ideas specifically around the growth mindset look of stubborn, right? So I think it's kind of fun for you to really see that in mind. But one of the things that's probably most variant in the idea of being fixed minded versus growth minded is the way you see failure. I think that's probably one of, to me, the most fascinating things to explore is that you have two different ways you can look at it. If you see it in a fixed mind, there is a way to do it, or I have the ability or I don't, and it's fixed. And so when I see a failure, to me, on the fixed mindset side, it is a massive impact because it almost freezes or paralyzes you. There's nowhere else to go. Versus someone who has that growth mindset, who's opportunistic, who really sees the opportunities really never being contained. They are much more likely to see failure as the most epic learning moment ever. To be able to say, oh my gosh, that was a jewel. I just found something so cool. Let's figure out what to do with that next. The energy that you create in those different mindsets is what sets, to me, apart people in either a positive anomaly state or a negative anomaly state. You either stand out for good reasons or you stand out for, those negative reasons. And so I love exploring for people, how do you get over here and become a positive anomaly just based on something as simple as the way you see failure?
And the applications for this, as you're talking, is my mind's literally racing and going back in examples all the way to my college days and high school days, of what grades meant. And
gosh, yes.
What did it mean if I got, I had all A's and a B, so why did you get a B? What did you do wrong? Or, I told you should have, worked a little harder, or if you would have applied yourself. So it always became a failure rather than say, I really struggled with that. And had I not pursued it, I might have gotten a D. Or if I didn't challenge it. So I learned a tremendous amount that I could apply next time. And I can go back and I saw that because, the first semester of a course, the fall semester, maybe I didn't get my A, but the second semester I did.
Yeah.
And that was more complicated. And it was like you adapt and you learn, but you go back and certainly the millennials were slammed for years. The millennial parents were slammed.
Yeah.
The millennials got blamed for it, but it was basically the parents, that there were no failures. I mean, you couldn't use red. You couldn't give an F. It was sort of a pass fail. Every, trophy kids, everybody was a winner. So there was this trend is that there were no failures. And that sort of was like that growth mindset. And I'm not sure, is that it was all an opportunity. It was all a journey. It was all about learning and it was all about participation.
Yeah.
That was probably the extreme side of that versus the stories you see, media, movies, relatives, is that, we need to, that before we have a child, we need to get on the waiting list to get into the best pre-nursery school and pay $50,000 a year so they can be the best person ever.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And you're so spot on, because as you mentioned earlier, clearly I couldn't have gotten my education or my learning to broaden if it didn't include Carol Dweck's work, because she was just so progressive. And I think what's interesting is she did take a very large set of her research in the concept of education. And she gives so many great examples in that book. But what's awesome is that her book also expands to not just how you show people the process of learning itself, that you're not just born with a certain capacity of being smart. Right? That's not true. That there's this wonderful proof that it's about the journey of the way you see the learning process. And I think in today's world, when we've got so much adversity in multiple dimensions, and you've got lots of challenges that we're all facing, there's so many unknowns even ahead of us in the next 6 months to 2020 before we get to close the chapter on the year 2020. But when you consider the idea of what this can do for you, be mindful that if you're looking at your team, you're looking at yourself, you're looking at your children or your spouse or your significant close relatives in the inner circle of your life, do you want to be seen as someone who's resilient, who can take whatever it is and say, I know what to do with that, even though I don't know the exact what to do, I know how to approach it? Or do you want someone who has a fixed mentality, who says, well, guess we're not going to do anything? And again, if you can leverage the idea of what she puts into place, it's not just about the process of learning as a young adult. We do that through our whole lives. There's never a time where you stop growing the way you see the world. And what she proves is that whatever fixed mindsets you have now, which, by the way, we all have some, right? Whatever they are, she gives great research support to, you can change those. You just have to know some great ideas and spurs to get there, which is what I love doing, is helping people come up with a few of those to begin.
And it's often the balance. I mean, it's not binary. It's not like you have a growth mindset or you have a fix, which is what you said.
Yes.
So you said you loved teaching in college, you had experience. I had an opportunity 9 years ago, I guess. And I that was one thing that I said, I've got all this knowledge, and again, as I was getting older, and I've had my own company, and I just being out there and in conversations, I meet people from all walks of life, all ages, all generations. But it's not the same as working in an organization where you have those people that you can throw ideas out at. And so I wanted to get, I enjoyed the opportunity. I taught in a community college for a little bit, and then had an opportunity at a university. And I really enjoyed, having people 30 years, 35 years younger. And again, it wasn't me standing up there as the older baby boomer spewing all the knowledge I had. I was trying to get their perspective.
Yeah.
What's it like to be 20 years old and, near graduation, or 21 years old and near graduation? And, how did you look at, and I was teaching HR and staffing at that point, did people look at that? What did work look like? And sort of getting that perspective. But so that's the growth mindset part. I certainly went in with a fixed mindset, but a long way around the story is I just got hired, I guess, to teach a new course, brand new graduate program in leadership.
Awesome.
Yeah. And my topic, again, you talk about timing, other stuff, is organizational change.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I sort of have a blank slate to do it, which is a challenge, rather than saying, hey, we selected this book, can you design a course around that? So that'd be the fixed mindset part. But I found myself, because there's a cohort of us, there's a bunch of us that are participating in it. Now, I'm the only one who has not taught in a university on a regular basis.
Okay.
So there are people that are consultants and business people that are there. Most of the people, their careers were either, at one time they were teachers, they were executives who moved into academia, but they've been through this before to some degree.
Yeah.
And they're providing me a framework and to do it. So I'm putting this together last weekend and go, I don't know if I'm going to do as well as I should. Or how am I going to compare to those other people?
Yeah. And
it goes back to what you're saying about
it's true, right?
Yeah. It's like, so I submit, they provided here's your goals, here's your outcome, here's the goals, the objectives, what people would learn, the learning outcomes, and then the activities. And I'm struggling with this, and it's going, oh, is this as good as it can be? I'm not sure if this is going to be right. Rather than looking at it, here's the path. And the worst thing thing that'll happen is I submit it and they say, this isn't what we're looking for. And I go, I don't want to embarrass myself. They hired me for this position. Maybe they'll think they made a mistake. And all this stuff you heard growing up, all this fixed mindset stuff.
That's right.
And where does that get transferred? And obviously I learned to get around that in my life. But you think about that as, well, I don't want to look stupid in front of my boss.
That's right.
We're talking about lie, people lie during an interview.
Yeah.
Well, it's the context of the interview. If you're looking at it to say, we're looking for people who fit our mold, then no one is going to reveal why they don't fit that mold, but that's an opportunity.
It sure is. Yeah. And what's interesting is you're talking two things that you brought up that I find, again, just so interesting. One, I love that you went into the process knowing that no matter the age gap, there was a wonderful opportunity for you to learn from these students that you had all those years ago. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term gentoring, but essentially it's reverse mentoring. And I love teaching people that I coach to embrace gentoring because you grow from the experiences of other people's lens, no matter their age, no matter their background. That goes back to being inclusive, right? And so that's a growth mindset.
Yeah, I didn't hear the term gentoring, but the reverse mentoring.
Yeah, it's that wonderful idea. And then the other thing that's, I think, super interesting is that one of the things that you said that's really important and that is definitely embedded in Carol Dweck's work is that she said, initially you think that, hey, a child in a growth mindset home, if you have two parents who are growth minded, is gonna definitely be growth minded, and a child of a person who is raising them in a fixed mindset home is going to be fixed minded. Same thing with teachers. If I have students and I'm one or the other, I'm likely going to cultivate that. Well, they found no evidence that growth minded teachers or parents created growth minded children, and here's why. You could have the idea in your head that you know what growth mindset is, and it's about the process, and about being opportunistic and being embracing of what could be. But then you go and say things that aren't what you're thinking, and you're showing a completely different view. You say things like, well, it should have been that. In your head, you're thinking, but we can explore, but you didn't say that. So there's this really interesting lineup between what you're thinking and what they're seeing. And often people who think that they are growth minded don't show it as transparently as we could, which is another part of the process. So when you said in your head, you're thinking, I might embarrass myself. I don't know if I'm, cut out for this course. The biggest part of that we train on creating a growth mindset is catching it. That's awareness. You have to really have great awareness because we're all going to be fixed minded occasionally. You have to catch it and say, wait, whoa, hold on. What can I do that would be growth minded in that moment? Those are the people who succeed. They're the ones who actually transparently end up showing more growth minded moments. And they certainly do what I would call cultivate more of a culture around themselves because they take a completely different approach. So it's a kind of a dicey place to go, but you have to be more conscious of it. And that's the very beginning of your journey.
Yeah, and there's two things and I know you and I think we talked about both of these, but as soon as you talk about self-awareness, then you're talking about emotional intelligence.
That's exactly right.
I'm in the assessment business, so we do this all the time, and not necessarily a lot of emotional intelligence assessments, but personality and leadership, and, people and attitude and a good fit. And so I would say almost every conversation I get in, especially at a leadership role, somebody says, well, does this measure emotional intelligence? And my response to them is, I said, listen, there's four, depending on the philosophy, but generally there's four parts of emotional intelligence. It's self-awareness is number one. Then it's being aware of who you are, and then it's how well do you manage all of that.
That's right.
Do I recognize that in other people? How socially aware am I? Do I recognize the emotions either collectively or individually in other people? And then what do I do about it?
That's right.
How do I manage that? So if you took that you can look at all the different models, but it somewhat comes down to that. But it still starts with self-awareness.
It does.
You can't manage other people. You can't do any of the other four. And I said, so this is the first step. This is, now if I'm assessing you as a hire, that's not helping you unless you share the results and make people aware. But I said, what your conversation should be, if they're extroverted, then the conversation, I said, great. That doesn't mean they're good or bad, but it's how aware are they of that they are extroverted? How aware are they of what it takes to be in the presence of an introvert?
Yeah.
That's the conversation that should be had. But everybody goes back as, we need a test for emotional intelligence. Leading into that. So growth mindset absolutely fits into EQ. And so people spend all this time on EQ, but they don't address the underlying problem associated with it. But as you were talking, I'm thinking self-confidence is huge.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, is the ability to make, so part of the equation is self-confidence, is the ability for me to make a mistake and be okay with it. And obviously, most people tell me I'm pretty confident, except when it came up to filling out this form. It's like, what is wrong? Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe they made a mistake. And then you sort of, I'm glad you said that. You sort of check yourself.
Yeah.
You move on. And it turned out, she said, I got a response last night from her, and she said, wow. She says, this was more comprehensive than anybody else's. But I think it's too comprehensive. I don't know how you're accomplish this in 8 weeks. She says, but I love the detail. I love your approach. I love the diversity of that. Yeah. And so it was like, okay, I guess, I'm the right guy for the job.
Yeah.
But you go down and especially in today's white, because I want to segue this a little bit into where we're headed with this.
Yeah.
If you put this into the whole, everything that's been happening with race and discrimination, and you think about one of the underlying problems you have with, with sort of lower income and with minorities and lesser education, it's not that there's not enough, certainly there needs to be more money and a different approach, but the lack of confidence, within a lot of young people of all socioeconomic groups. Certainly if you have the resources to give all the tools and all the support and everything you need, that doesn't mean that they all turned out to be super confident, but at least it helps. But when people have nothing to begin with, and they're told their entire life that they're not good enough, it could be gender, it could be age, it could be socioeconomics, it could be color, it could be ethnicity, that they're not good enough, then people doubt themselves. And then it's like, okay, I always got to be on the pedestal. I always got to have this show out there. So, the fact is you can talk about all these things, but it still comes down to how do you teach people to have more of a growth mindset. We're always growing. We have to stop. So
that's exactly right. And when you think about it, I mean, diversity and inclusion are not two new words, right? They've been around for a long time. And you said this really well. I think most of us end up spending time maybe in one half of that two-part formula. And we think, okay, how do I get the surface level to look diverse? And we think about our hiring practices and we think about all the boxes we have to check and we start to be compliant in that regard. But I think on the back end, we don't realize is that the diverse side of it is the who we're getting. The inclusion side of it is how we treat them once we have them. And I don't think we do a very good job on the back end. And that's what this mindset concept really does for you. It talks about how do you change the way you talk, even something as simple as the way you hold a meeting. There are some tiny little things you can do inside your organizations. And of course, you can do it as a person too. But when you think about the what you do, that shows how you're treating people. And that is what can really move the needle on making someone feel like they were included, that we have inclusivity that's not necessarily just a box or something, a placard on the wall that says we're an inclusive culture. No, that's not enough, right? I need to be able to feel it. And there have to be things that you do. And that goes back to no matter where we started or what's on the surface, how do we teach people the way that we approach a conversation, the way we approach a moment with other people that actually embodies inclusivity? And there are ways to do that. I just don't know that we probably have enough conversations about it right now.
Right. Well, and you're exactly right. And I can think about all the conference, again, and I don't want to make light of it, but diversity is really, you can fill in the blocks and you can meet quotas.
Right.
And companies even struggled with doing that. You can technically meet that goal. The inclusivity part is really the challenge.
Oh, sure.
And again, going back to self-confidence, but another thing that I just put I'm scrolling it across the banner if anybody wants to do it. We just released one is a white paper on trust, how to build trust. But it was also a profile that Dr. Coker, Chuck Coker, Charles Coker, a good friend of mine, we've worked together for 25 years. He basically studied, he was looking for, were there basic traits or attributes or elements that we had that would allow other people to trust us? How do you build trust? And we looked at five. He looked at 5 factors, and one of them was transparency. So we've heard that word a lot. We need to be more transparent. and then relatable. So those are the two most obvious. Do you have not necessarily charisma, but you have a good personality? Can people relate to you? How relatable are you? And how transparent are you? Are you empathetic? Then it got interesting because it looked at what he calls practicality. And practicality was, do people accept your judgment? So I can really like you and I love having a conversation, but would I pick the phone up and call you? Do I trust you in judgment? So that's another component. So really have trust would be that. And then there's a feasibility part. And is it practical? Does it make sense? So I can, I agree with you, but where do we go with it? And the last part was empowerment. And it was interesting because I sort of pointed this out to him of where I thought it was headed. And if I can delegate, people said, oh, yeah, I've learned to collaborate and I share. But do people feel empowered when they're with you? So giving people a task does not or something to do does not necessarily mean they felt empowered. So it was an interesting perspective. The first is you sort of control that.
That's
the
right.
other is you almost have to ask the other people, is the way that you deliver it. And in order to do that, you have to be pretty accepting. We're bringing this back into growth mindset. You have to be pretty accepting that people will make mistakes.
Oh, right.
Or that people make mistakes and they're okay coming to you because they respect your judgment, you're relatable, you're transparent, and you're not going to yell and scream and they're not going to be worried about losing their job.
Yeah. And they'll trust that if in the future, if you really do show that and you're authentic about it and you do, and I love those, that combination of 5 things is really powerful. If you are able to do that, what do people do differently tomorrow than they did today? Well, when you show that, they get to be a witness to someone who's actually really not just saying it, but they're living it. They're giving you a chance to go explore. That's true empowerment. And then when we fail, they're trying to use it as a moment of value. And so they celebrate. As a teaser, one of the things that I'll no doubt mention, because I think it's so awesome, is there are certain companies who are amazing at creating growth mindset cultures. And one of the ones that I know I mentioned in the webinar you said in an Ira was there are organizations who have a failure graveyard. Like, let's just dump them in there, put them on display. And then there are others who have failure Fridays, and they actually have a retrospective where every Friday they learn something, and they do it in a way that's engaging. And it's meant to be positive and powerful, and it's expected. And then you know what you do? You trust that if you fail, you trust that you're going to get to do something with it that's good. And you change the complete paradigm of the way people feel. And that, by the way, creates an inclusive culture. You want to literally magnetize that to, more moments of those. And so you start to really dig roots in, and that changes the way that people perform and the way that they think, which I think is spot on. So I totally agree. What a cool assessment. I like the idea of that.
Yeah, so it looks at that, and it takes about 10 minutes. We also just released a white paper just this week.
Okay.
And there's the link on it, and it explains a little bit more of the background on this. And and frankly, I wrote it right before all the incidents of all the tragedies of last week. But it would have brought a whole other thing of obviously there's a lack of trust. There's a lack of trust right now with police departments, with government officials. And obviously the flip side of that is people don't trust the demonstrators and the protesters and the looters, which maybe have a reason not to be trusted, but certainly not the protesters. Is how can we trust that they're going to remain peaceful? How can we trust that we're not going to get hurt? There's a lack of trust, and it provides a framework in that. But in order to be able to do that, there is not going to be a perfect solution. There is not going to be somebody that comes out and says, "Here's how I would approach this." Everybody's sort of looking. I don't agree with a lot of the leadership stuff, so I don't want to go political on us. But everybody says, "Boy, if we had a different leader." Well, every leader is going to make mistakes. So everybody needs to have a bit of a growth mindset that we're living on this journey. Yeah. And there's a lot of problems. Everybody wants it to be fixed right the first time.
Yeah, we often in our coaching, typically what we typically do as a platform for where you go when you start the concept of learning how to change the way you approach your world, we often start with awareness. We've already mentioned that. And we talk to people about how important it is that you are able to catch what you're doing, how you're thinking, and the impact that has on other people. But pretty quickly thereafter, we will teach people how to have a really healthy pause button coupled with a really healthy, what we call prove it button, because you need to be able to pause long enough to say, am I being objective? Am I looking at this the right way? Am I judging this unfairly? And when you do that, you get so much closer to that path for trust, because then you can use what we often call empathetic expression, where you can be very open, but also give people permission to have a lens, but in a safe space. And when you can do that, again, all of those really tie nicely to having a growth mindset, which leads to inclusivity. But those aren't things people often know how to do without being shown. And so that's why you have to learn it. You have to be taught, and there have to be ways that you can actually start to show those behaviors yourself.
And there's going to be some stumbles along the way.
Oh, for sure.
As you're talking, I have to go back and pull out my outline and resources and go, did I even include growth mindset? I know the concept I did, but I have to say, did I include a book on growth mindset, in my class on growth organizational change? Because obviously that's going to be a big
for sure.
Because people have to understand that there's going to be a lot of mistakes made along the way. Hey, you and I can talk all day about this.
We could.
But I know other people have things to do, and hopefully they're going to go out there and that they learned. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, our website, which is just faurotegroup.com. So our organization, FAUROTE group.com, is a great place for you to see what we do. But specifically, we have an events page. We have very much like the world is trying to transition into growth. We've found new ways to help people through what's going on. We also have opportunities to connect. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. Hopefully you do. I would love to connect if I can be a resource in any way. But the idea here is that I'm so looking forward to a webinar that we're going to do together, Ira, where we really talk about ways we can leverage this further. So we hope to see you there.
Absolutely. And I have the link up here. You can go up there. There will be some changes to the page. We're still working on that a little bit, but you can get registered for that. July 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be talking about cultivating diversity and inclusion by applying the growth mindset. So that'll be great. That'll be a lot of fun. We'll get that promoted and hope to see everybody there. And a few other things. Just a reminder. We'll come back to you, Sarah, in a minute. The following Thursday at 2 p.m. Got the Future of Employment webinar to part 2. We're going to be talking about talent strategies. That'll take place again. That's on June 25th, and at 2 p.m. So we're going to be talking about that. So you can register for that as well. And finally, any final words, comments, thoughts for the day?
I would just say that given the fact that we are definitely in a time that none of us have really ever seen or experienced firsthand, I can't think of a better way for you to continue to allow yourself to make something positive and productive come out of this than continuing to learn, whether it's about growth mindset or many of the things that Ira's already shared. But finding these small ways to get new ideas and perspectives into your world is what's going to make a difference. So explore, right? Find people to give you some recommendations and take advantage of even the smallest margin of time. And I think that can make a big difference.
Well said. I think that's a good place to let everybody go. So I appreciate it, Sarah. Hey, it's great seeing you and talking.
Yeah, back at you.
Hopefully, I look forward. I'm sure we'll be talking over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
In preparation for this, and again, hopefully, I'm sure we're going to have another great conversation in a big crowd that day. Just a reminder for everybody to go up to, if you're not a member yet, to go up to Googleizationnation.com. And you can register. You get updates about the podcast, the webinars that are coming up, and quite a few other events. And with that, we're going to sign off. Let everybody go. Hopefully, continue being safe, especially now that the business seems to be reopening. We're getting back there, so stay safe, be cautious, but start to move on the journey to the new normal. So, see you, everybody.
That's right. Bye, everyone.